I'm the storyteller, and my stories must be told. I have many stories, tales for both the young and old. I have many voices to describe many places. Many names have I, and many faces. In Russia I am Ivan, in Sweden I am Jan. In Germany I'm Johann, in America I'm John. From my many travels I have gathered these tales to teach you good sense when all else fails. Sometimes there are tears, sometimes there is laughter, but always are happily ever after.
Long ago and far away in a mountainous country, there was once a prosperous kingdom. The capital of this kingdom was a bustling town where all the citizens worked hard, long hours. One of the busiest people in the whole town was the tailor. Busy though he was, he never seemed to make enough money to satisfy his wife. That man worked all the hours that God sent. However hard he worked, his wife continued to nag him for more money. The fact is that tailoring is not particularly well-paid work. As a result, his wife could never afford the fine clothes she felt her beauty deserved. She was very dissatisfied with her lot and far from grateful that she had a loving husband who cared deeply for her. She was forever comparing her poor garments with the finery of the rich ladies from the palace. How did they manage to get the money while she and her husband had to struggle so? She bitterly wondered. One day, she felt sure she had tumbled on the secret to wealth. All the astrologers who practiced in the market square, especially the royal astrologer, seemed to be making a lot of money. The royal astrologer was renowned far and wide for the accuracy of his predictions, and he couldn't count the number of clients he had, rich people who paid him in gold to tell them what the future held in store for them. What special skills did he need, pray? The tailor's wife thought. Why, just some fine robes and an astrological chart, nothing her husband couldn't make. She hurried home, her thoughts full of her wonderful idea. Her husband was to give up tailoring and become an astrologer. The tailor let his wife talk on, as he just carried on with his work. His wife was always full of fancies, but tailoring was his trade. That was the business he knew. After all, he was the best tailor in town. Yes, but astrology is much more lucrative, his wife urged. That's the way to make money, and everybody wants to know what the future holds. Believe you me, the royal astrologer earns more in a day than you do in a month. If you don't become an astrologer right away, I shall leave you. I'm sick of living in poverty. Well, that was a different matter, for the tailor dearly loved his wife, demanding though she was. With great reluctance, he gave in to her unreasonable request. He set himself up as an astrologer, taking his place in the market square with all the others. At least it would prove to his wife that it wasn't his business. After he'd stood in the market for a couple of days not earning a penny, perhaps she would see that she was wrong after all and let him go back to his tailoring. The tailor set up his sign of the sun in splendor, a lucky symbol, and began to tell the crowd how he knew the secret ways of the sun and the moon and the stars, and that the future was open to his eyes. Just then the royal jeweler approached the tailor with a sad tale to tell. He had lost a precious ruby which the king had given him. The royal astrologer couldn't tell him where it was, and the royal jeweller was now desperate. The king would have his head if the ruby wasn't restored to him. "Tell me about the loss," the tailor said, hoping that the jeweller's story would contain a clue as to where the ruby could be found. But all the jeweller could say was that he had had it safely locked in his chest one day and it had gone the next. He would give the tailor 200 gold coins if he could find it, but if not, he would have the tailor beheaded. "I shall return at midday," the jeweller warned, "and I shall want an answer then. If you can't say where the ruby is, your head's for it." "Oh, wife, what misery you've caused your unhappy husband," the tailor groaned in despair, not realizing that he was overheard by the jeweller's wife's maid, who rushed to tell her mistress that the new astrologer knew everything. For the fact was that the jeweller's wife had herself stolen the ruby. She had no alternative, she felt, but to throw herself at the astrologer's mercy. "I stole the ruby," she told the tailor. "I know that you know it, but I took it because my husband's mean and cruel. You are so kind and generous. Please tell me, how can I save myself?" The tailor was astounded at this turn of events, but he told the woman to go home and place the ruby under her husband's pillow. That was all. The delighted woman didn't need to be told twice. She rushed off immediately to do the tailor's bidding. Promptly at midday, the jeweller returned. The tailor told the man that, having studied his charts with great diligence, the ruby was not stolen, merely mislaid. "Go home right away and look under your pillow," he directed the astonished man. "You will find the ruby safely there. If it's not there, don't forget your heads for it," the jeweller threatened as he left. Of course, the ruby was indeed there, and the jeweller returned a happy man. He was delighted to have his ruby back, and the tailor was equally happy with his reward of 200 gold coins. The only person who was decidedly unhappy was the royal astrologer, who eyed his new rival with deep suspicion. The tailor couldn't wait to hurry home to his wife and tell her the good news. Surely all this money would satisfy her now. It was more than enough money to buy all the silks and furs she craved for the rest of her life, and he could go back to tailoring. But he hadn't counted on his wife's greed. "This is just the beginning. If you can do it once, you can do it again." The tailor didn't share his wife's certainty. He knew that he'd been very lucky, and that kind of luck doesn't repeat itself. The following morning, he returned to his astrologer's pitch with a heavy heart, dreading what might transpire. Quite a crowd gathered to listen as he boasted that he knew the secrets of the sun and the moon and the stars, for word of how he had restored the royal jeweller's ruby had spread through the town. "The sun sees everything, and he tells me what he sees," the tailor told the people. "That is the secret of my success." While he was proclaiming in this manner, a fine lady had slipped behind the great cloth portraying the sun in splendour. She started urgently whispering to the tailor. But what with his own shouting and the noise of the crowd and the market, he couldn't quite hear what she was saying. The woman repeated that her precious necklace and earrings had vanished, and that her husband would punish her severely if he found out, and she begged the tailor to tell her where they were. But her voice was still muffled, and the tailor simply couldn't hear her. "Use the hole," he told her, meaning the hole in the cloth that signified the sun's mouth. But the moment he spoke, she cried, "Thank you, thank you." The tailor was most astonished at her response. He couldn't think what she was thanking him for. But she knew as she hurried home. At the base of her clock was an ornate niche, and there, safe and sound, were her necklace and earrings. She must have put them there while undressing and forgotten all about it. What a wise man that astrologer was, and how grateful she was to be saved from her husband's fury. She lost no time in hurrying back to the market square. There, in front of the whole crowd, she told everyone how this clever man had found her jewellery. She gave him a rich reward. Well, everyone was most impressed by this brilliant new astrologer, and he lost no time in telling people how the future was an open book to him. Of course, no one was more delighted by this turn of events than his wife, who was convinced that their fortune could be made this way. She insisted that he continue with his new role as astrologer. "If you can do it twice," she declared, "you can do it again." The tailor wasn't nearly so sure. With a heavy heart, he agreed to carry on. The royal astrologer was furious about this man's great success and hatched a plot to show up this new astrologer once and for all. So he bribed a well-known thief to steal the king's treasure from the heavily guarded treasure room. Who would have thought that such a thing could happen? When the king discovered that no less than 7 bags full of gold coins had been stolen, he was so shocked at the outrage that he fainted dead away and had to be revived. When he called his royal astrologer to help him find the treasure, the wily man told him, "A new astrologer has come into our midst. Why not summon him and see if he can throw any light on this mystery?" The king agreed, to the royal astrologer's secret glee. He knew full well where the gold was hidden and knew the tailor would never be able to find it. A guard was sent immediately to where the tailor had his pitch in the marketplace and told the startled man that the king demanded his presence right away in the palace. "The king?" cried the tailor, his heart sinking. Whatever that meant, it was not good news. He had no alternative but to obey. When he bowed before the king demanded, "Who is the scoundrel who has stolen my treasure?" "Surely your royal astrologer can tell you that, your majesty," the tailor replied. But the royal astrologer smoothly retorted, "I have already told the king that you have confused my readings of the stars with your unorthodox behavior." And the tailor realized then that he was trapped. There was no escape. "Since 7 bags of gold have been stolen, there are 7 thieves," he told the king. "Therefore I need 7 days in which to study my charts and discover who's responsible for this theft." "Very well," the king agreed suspiciously. "You may have these 7 days, but on the 8th day, if you cannot tell me where my gold is, your life is forfeit." With a heavy heart, the tailor slowly returned home. "This is where your greed has landed us, wife," he cried bitterly. "I've been found out. Who on earth knows where the king's gold is? Not I, for one. This is all your doing, and my life will be forfeit as a result. Who will then look after you?" His wife was a bit ashamed by his accusations, but she was not completely abashed. "You've been clever enough before," she remarked. "Surely the same methods you've used before you can employ now. It can't be that difficult to find out where so much gold is hidden." The tailor felt that if he lived to be 100, he would never be able to solve this problem. He had merely been lucky before. Gloomily, he placed 7 apples in a bowl, telling his wife, "I shall eat 1 apple at the end of each day. If I've not thought of a solution at the end of the 7th day, you might as well kiss me goodbye, for that's when I shall be executed." Meanwhile, the robber chief and his 6 men, who were hiding in a cave in the mountains, heard tell that the king had commanded the clever new astrologer to find them and the gold's whereabouts, and they decided to send one of the men to spy on him, to make sure the astrologer didn't stumble on the truth. That evening, the thief arrived outside the tailor's house just as the tailor started to eat one apple to signify the passing of one day. Warily, the thief climbed into a big barrel so that he could hear but not be seen. To his horror, he heard the tailor declare, "Here's the first of 7," as he threw the apple core out of the window. The thief couldn't wait to get back to the cave and report that the moment he had arrived outside the tailor's window, the clever man had cried, "Here is the first of 7. The game's up," the thief wept. "The astrologer knows who we are." But the robber chief maintained that this was just a coincidence. The astrologer could have been talking about anything. So he sent off another thief to spy on the tailor and find out if the tailor really knew who they were. The next evening, the second thief crept up to the house, just as the tailor was sadly biting into the second apple. The thief quietly climbed into the barrel so that he could hear without being seen. To his horror, he heard the tailor cry, "Here's the second of the 7, as he threw the apple core out of the window. Well, that proved it. The second thief couldn't wait to hurry back and report to his chief that there was no longer any doubt the clever astrologer knew everything. Their wrongdoing was discovered, and they agreed that they had no alternative but to throw themselves at the mercy of the astrologer and confess everything. Perhaps he could be bribed into silence. The 7 men talked over this matter long and hard, expecting each day to be arrested because of the astrologer's uncanny knowledge. Nothing happened. The astrologer was clearly playing a waiting game. At last, the robber chief decided that he would approach the astrologer and confess everything. If the man was merciful, they might at least escape with their lives. He arrived at the house just as the tailor was finishing the 7th apple, and just in time to hear the tailor exclaim, "Here is the 7th. The robber chief shuddered at the powers of the astrologer as he knocked on the door. The tailor thought it was the king's guard come to arrest him. Bidding farewell to his wife, he opened the door saying, "I know why you've come." The robber chief now had no doubt of the astrologer's great knowledge, and he humbly confessed, "I've come to offer you 2,000 gold pieces if you do not tell the king that we stole his treasure." The tailor was a quick-witted man. It took him just a second to realize what the robber chief was saying. Once more his luck had held good. "Do you think you can fool me when I know the secrets of the stars?" he demanded sternly, and commanded the robber chief that all the king's gold had to be returned. But he was prepared to save the band's lives if they obeyed his instructions. Gratefully, the chief hurried off to do what the astrologer ordered, much relieved to escape from death. But he wasn't half as happy as the tailor and his wife. They too had been spared. The following morning, the 8th day, dressed in their very best clothes, they set off with high hearts to the palace. The last 7 days had been a nightmare for them, and it had certainly taught the tailor's wife a lesson. She had learnt to value her husband for himself, a good, hard-working man who loved her, and she realized that was a far greater treasure than all the furs and silks in the kingdom. The tailor, too, was a happy man. "Have you good news?" the king demanded as the tailor and his wife bowed before him. "It's a difficult problem, Your Majesty," the tailor replied, "and the stars will only give you a choice of one or the other. The thieves who stole your gold or the gold itself." "The gold, that's all I'm interested in," the king cried, jumping with glee. "Then you will find it in the well in the market square," the tailor revealed. Without any further ado, the whole royal party hurried out of the palace down to the square as fast as their legs could carry them. Although it must be said that as the king was not in the habit of running, he did need a little help. The only person who was not delighted by this happy outcome was the royal astrologer, who could clearly be heard gnashing his teeth as he followed the king. Anxiously, the party peered into the well's murky depths. Nothing could be seen. Anxiously, a guard put his arm right down into the well and lifted up the royal casket, which still safely contained the king's 7 bags of gold. The king's delight knew no bounds. That new astrologer's prediction was absolutely correct. He hugged the man like a brother, exclaiming, "You're the cleverest man in the kingdom, much, much cleverer than that old charlatan who's been pulling the wool over my eyes all these years." And turning to the royal astrologer, he cried, "Fellow, you're dismissed." To make matters worse, gold coins from the royal treasure fell from his sleeves. When he realized that the royal astrologer had connived in the theft, the king's anger knew no bounds. He immediately appointed the tailor as his new astrologer and ordered that the ex-astrologer be punished in a fitting manner. He, the king, would set an example that he hoped all his citizens would follow. And it must be admitted that all the townsfolk gleefully joined in with the punishment with gusto. The royal astrologer had never been a popular man. The new one, their old tailor, certainly had been. And now it seemed certain that as the new astrologer, he would remain so.